So when you think of Labor Day, what pops into your head? Is it maybe the last big barbecue of the summer? Or maybe hitting those end-of-season sales? For a lot of us, yeah, it's those relaxing things, right? Barbecues, maybe a quick getaway, kind of marks the unofficial end of summer before school kicks off again. But what if there's, well, a much deeper story? A more dramatic one behind this holiday we all know. In this deep dive, we're going way beyond just the long weekend. We're unpacking the, honestly, surprisingly dramatic history. Often violent, actually, and incredibly impactful. The story behind Labor Day and the whole American labor movement. Our mission here is to really understand where it came from, the big struggles that shaped it, how it connects to economic equality, and what it all means for American workers today.
Exactly. And to do that, we've pulled together quite a stack of sources. We'll be looking at historical accounts like from the U.S. Department of Labor, history.com. We've also got perspectives from labor groups, say the California Federation of Teachers, plus analyses from historians and current news outlets, too. The goal isn't just reciting facts, it's connecting those dots,
Um,
showing you the bigger picture, the forces really at play.
Absolutely. So the journey ahead. We'll trace worker struggles way back, colonial times even, and look at the, well, pretty contentious birth of the Labor Day holiday itself, right in the middle of national unrest. We'll see how different ideas about unions help shape the American middle class. And then we'll get into the challenges and maybe some resurgences facing labor in what some people are calling a new Gilded Age. Oh, okay, let's dive into these sources, right? Let's set the scene. Picture late 19th century America. The Industrial Revolution is roaring. What was life really like for the average worker then? Our sources, they paint a pretty grim picture. We're talking 12-hour days, 7-day weeks, often just to scrape by. And kids, as young as 5 or 6 years old, toiling away in factories, mines, really unsafe conditions, earning pennies compared to adults, often no fresh air, terrible sanitation, not even regular breaks. It sounds like a truly brutal system.
And what's really key here, the sources really stress this, is the backdrop of completely unrestricted capitalism. The main takeaway is that before unions really got going, workers had, well, basically no rights, virtually none in the workplace. And it wasn't just factory jobs either. If we're being honest about labor history, we have to include resistance to forced labor too. Think about the Stoner Rebellion back in 1739. Enslaved people fighting for freedom, holding banners saying liberty, that's a labor struggle. Or decades later, the Lowell Mill girls in the 1830s. They organized strikes, protested wage cuts, horrific conditions. They really helped raise awareness. These were, powerful early calls for basic economic rights, political rights, long before anyone thought of a Labor Day.
Wow. It's hard to even imagine what daily life was like. Really puts our own work situations into perspective, doesn't it? Okay, so against this backdrop, harsh conditions, this early resistance starting to bubble up, workers began organizing more formally. The first big public celebration, the one that sort of kicked off Labor Day, was September 5th, 1882. New York City is put together by the Central Labor Union and the Knights of Labor. Sources say somewhere between 10,000, maybe even 20,000 workers marched. Newspapers reported they carried signs like "All men are born equal," and "Labor creates all wealth," demanding better hours, safer conditions. And this idea, this working men's holiday, it caught on fast. States like Oregon, Colorado, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York made it official pretty quickly by 1887.
Which brings up a really interesting point. Why September? Most of the world marks International Workers' Day on May 1st. Our sources point to a very complex history here. May 1st got tangled up with the Haymarket Affair in Chicago, 1886. That started as peaceful protests for an 8-hour day, but it turned violent. Police and workers were killed. There was a bombing. Labor leaders were executed. It was intense. So the key thing here is that U.S. officials, they were really wary. They didn't want to officially endorse a holiday linked to that kind of radicalism, that violence. They actively looked for a, let's say, less inflammatory alternative.
Okay, that makes sense. Politics playing a role even then. But the story gets even more dramatic in 1894. That year was defined by the Pullman strike. Big one. Railroad workers walked out after George Pullman cut their wages but refused to lower the rent in his company town. I mean, basically trapping them. The American Railway Union, Eugene V. Debs was leading it, called for a boycott of all Pullman cars. It crippled rail traffic, business, across 27 states. Massive disruption. And the response. President Grover Cleveland sent 12,000 federal troops into Chicago to break the strike. It led to intense violence, over a dozen workers killed, maybe as many as 30.
Right. And here's where the political maneuvering really jumps out. Historians point out something crucial. Just days before sending in those troops, like literally days. On June 28th, 1894, President Cleveland signed the bill making Labor Day a federal holiday on the first Monday in September. So it wasn't just a nice gesture. It was, according to these analyses, calculated election year politicking. a strategic move to try and appease the nation's workers, right? To calm things down, avoid alienating this growing labor vote. The bill was apparently rushed through Congress unanimously right after the strike started. It landed on Cleveland's desk just 6 days after the troops went into Chicago. It's just a stark reminder, isn't it? Even our holidays can have these really deliberate political roots.
That is quite something. A federal holiday born basically under the shadow of federal troops cracking down on workers. Wow. And then there's the whole mystery about who actually founded Labor Day. That adds another layer, doesn't it? Our sources show these conflicting claims. Was it Peter J. McGuire? He was a co-founder of the American Federation of Labor, general secretary for the Carpenters Union. He suggested a day for the laboring classes. Or was it Matthew McGuire, a machinist, secretary of the Central Labor Union in New York? He supposedly proposed the holiday first. Both guys claimed credit. Both were apparently at that first parade in 1882. Some papers at the time even backed McGuire. So yeah, the credit's still debated, but clearly the need for some kind of holiday, some recognition, was really strong. So within this growing labor movement, these two major philosophies started to emerge pretty early on. You had the American Federation of Labor, the AFL. They pushed for what they called pure and simple unionism, or sometimes called bread and butter unionism.
Yeah, and the contrast in their approach is really fascinating when you look at the sources. The AFL, initially at least, was pretty exclusive. They focused very narrowly on wages and benefits, mostly for white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, male, skilled workers. That was their base. It was really about getting a bigger piece of the pie, specifically for their members. They weren't initially getting deeply involved in broader social issues or politics outside the immediate workplace concerns. And, this more conservative, maybe defensive strategy, it actually helped them survive some tough times. They prospered into the 20th century by focusing on those immediate achievable goals.
Okay, so that's one path. But then, in stark contrast, you had the Knights of Labor. They embraced social justice unionism. Their motto was, an injury to one is a concern of all. How was their vision different? And what kind of impact did they have?
Well, their whole philosophy was much, much broader, more inclusive. They actively tried to organize across different groups, skilled, unskilled workers. They explicitly welcomed more women, more people of color, much wider net. And the Knights, they didn't just want a bigger slice of the pie as it was. They wanted to, and this is a key difference, change the way the pie was made and distributed. They even challenged the whole system of monopoly capitalism. They floated this radical idea of a cooperative commonwealth. Now, the Knights themselves didn't really survive as a major force into the new century, but their progressive vision, it laid really crucial groundwork for later movements. Especially the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, in the 1930s. The CIO organized across racial lines, particularly in big industries like auto and steel. And they were responsible for what sources call the single biggest upsurge of labor union membership and activity in all of U.S. history. That directly paved the way for things like the New Deal, laws like the Wagner Act, which finally gave unions legal recognition and protection.
Right, so it was that more inclusive social justice vision, embodied by the CIO especially, that really pushed labor into its peak period. And indeed, by the mid-20th century, like you said, unions hit their high watermark. Close to 35% of American workers belonged to a union. That's huge. And this era saw just incredible gains for workers all across the country.
Oh, absolutely. The list of achievements our sources lay out is really impressive. You've got the right to collectively bargain, first and foremost, a dramatically increased standard of living for millions. The 8-hour day, the 40-hour week, things we almost take for granted now. Minimum wage laws, crucial health and safety regulations on the job, child labor laws finally getting teeth. Plus, retirement benefits, pensions, KOA, cost of living adjustments to keep wages up with inflation and Social Security. The really critical insight here is that American workers, through unions, gained a seat at the table in government and definitely a bigger piece of the economic pie. And that directly tracks with the peak of the American middle class. It wasn't just policy, it fundamentally changed daily life, created economic security for vast numbers of people.
That's such a powerful link, union strength, directly correlating with the rise of the middle class. And that social justice thread didn't just end there, right? It continued. We see it really clearly with the farm workers movement. Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, Larry Itliong, the Delano grape strike in '65 is a huge example. Also, that merging of civil rights and labor rights. Martin Luther King Jr.'s final campaign, supporting sanitation workers in Memphis, powerfully shows that connection. Even public sector unions really took off after an executive order from President Kennedy in the '60s. Teachers, for instance, like the California Federation of Teachers, they finally won collective bargaining rights around 1975. And today, actually, there are slightly more union members in the public sector than in the private sector. Okay, so given all those massive gains, unions really building the middle class, What happened? What were the biggest factors that led to the decline from that mid-century peak?
Well, many sources point to a really pivotal moment in 1981. President Ronald Reagan's actions during the Pachios strike, he famously fired over 11,000 striking air traffic controllers. That act really sent a signal. It's seen as accelerating the decline of unions. Corporations basically understood they now had a friend in the White House. It emboldened employers, made them more willing to fight unions, less willing to negotiate seriously. And this leads to a really crucial insight that comes up in the economic analyses. As unions declined, wealth started getting redistributed upwards, away from working people. This helped create the conditions for what some economists label neoliberalism.
All right, neoliberalism. Can you unpack that a bit? What does it mean, and how did it contribute to that upward wealth shift?
Sure, it's basically an economic and political philosophy. And interestingly, its application has been pretty bipartisan over the decades. Generally, it favors things like less unionization, smaller government intervention in the economy, lower taxes, especially for corporations and the wealthy. And the result, as our sources explain it, is a much less equal society. Strikingly so, it actually starts to resemble the social inequality of the late 19th century Gilded Age. You know, that era of huge fortunes for a few, often built on shaky foundations, while many struggled with poverty and harsh working conditions. We have charts that show this clearly, union membership going down, while the share of national income going to the top 10%, and especially the top 1%, has shot way up, back to levels not seen since the 1920s, right before the Great Depression.
That's a stark comparison. Connecting union decline not just to wages, but to this massive shift in wealth distribution, echoing a previous Gilded Age. So, fast forward to today. Union membership is hovering around 12% overall, but in the private sector, it's only about 7%. That's a huge drop from 35%. And the direct result, you can see it in the data, is that American workers just have less power. Less power in the workplace, less political clout. Wages have largely stagnated or even declined in real terms for many, even though workers are more educated, more productive than ever. Meanwhile, corporate profits hit record highs. As economists like Paul Krugman have said, yeah, we are arguably in a new Gilded Age. We've even seen specific attacks aimed at weakening unions further, especially public sector ones, like the Supreme Court's Janus decision. That undermined their ability to collect fees from non-members who still benefit from the union contract, creating this free rider problem.
Exactly. And that's a major challenge. Collective action needs resources. That free rider issue is sort of designed to chip away at the financial stability and solidarity of unions.
But, okay, the story doesn't just end with decline and challenges. This is where it gets really interesting again. Despite decades of attacks, decades of decline, some of our sources suggest something fascinating is happening, that maybe unions have the wind at their backs for the first time in a long while.
Yes, there are definitely recent signs of life, signs of hope. Think about the success of the Fight for $15 movement. It significantly boosted minimum wages in many cities and states. We've seen big successful strikes, particularly in public education. West Virginia teachers in 2018 really kicked off a wave. There have been important electoral victories defending collective bargaining rights in some states, too. And internally, the AFL-CIO, the main federation, is actively trying to, as one source put it, resurrect the spirit of the CIO and social justice unionism, really reaching out to all kinds of workers, trying to bridge old divides. Plus, there's this really compelling statistic. Polls consistently show that more than half of non-union workers in America say they would join a union if they had the chance. That signals a huge potential, a significant unmet demand for representation.
That is a surprising statistic, especially after hearing about the long decline. It really suggests something is stirring. And this isn't just about abstract numbers or economic trends, is it? It impacts real people, real lives. I was reading this story about George Jackson, a construction worker, union member. He had a terrible accident on the job, broke his back when a beam came loose. Because he was union, workers' comp covered all his medical bills. Crucially, his union made sure he kept his job while recovering, instead of just being let go. He was eventually able to retire comfortably, had his pension, Social Security, savings from his 401k. It's just one story, an anecdote, but it really highlights the tangible difference a union can make, turning potential tragedy into a story of, well, security and gratitude for him and his family.
It's a perfect illustration, really. It shows those safety nets, the support systems that unions fought for and can provide, things that were just non-existent for workers back in that era of unrestricted capitalism we started with.
So, wrapping this all up, what does it mean for your Labor Day? For how you experience the holiday? Well, yeah, for many of us, it's definitely become the unofficial end of summer. Parades, picnics, barbecues, sales, all that fun stuff. But its core meaning, the reason it exists, is still that profound tribute to the American worker. It's a chance to relax, absolutely, but maybe also to reflect a bit on who actually built this country, who continues to drive its strength and innovation.
Yeah, sociologically, you can see that shift from more formal celebrations and, explicit advocacy towards more leisure, more consumerism. That reflects how society changes. But the sources emphasize that the essence of celebrating workers' contributions remains. It's still an opportunity to think about why we have the rights we do today. The 8-hour day, weekends, safety standards, and the often steep price, sometimes paid in blood, that many workers paid to win those rights. As the Department of Labor itself puts it, it's appropriate that the nation pays tribute on Labor Day to the creator of so much of its strength, freedom, and leadership, the American worker.
So today, we've taken quite a deep dive. We traced Labor Day from its roots in really brutal working conditions, the militant struggles of the early movement, through its strategic, frankly political, establishment amidst conflict. We saw the rise of unions, the building of the middle class, then the decline, and now its evolving meaning in this potential new Gilded Age.
So yeah, as you enjoy your Labor Day weekend, maybe it's with family, friends, maybe just some quiet time, maybe take a moment. Consider the really profound history behind this holiday. Beyond the barbecues and the sales, remember it's meant as that tribute to the creator of so much of the nation's strength, freedom, and leadership, the American worker.
And here's a final thought to leave you with, drawing from our sources, particularly those referencing economists like Thomas Piketty. They suggest that, generally, wealth tends to concentrate in capitalist economies over time, unless there's significant political intervention to counteract it. Now, if the labor movement has historically been, perhaps the only political mechanism American workers have ever had to effectively address this concentration of wealth, and if, as we heard, over half of non-union workers today say they want to join a union, what does that tell us? What might that mean for the future of work, wealth, and equality in America? It seems the struggle for a fairer future, the one that gave us Labor Day in the first place, is maybe far from over.